Welcome to Fireside Chats with Erin, the reboot. I'm Erin Gowrluck, the president of the Canada Grains Council and your host. This podcast serves as a platform to explore grain sector priorities that reflect the Council's work here at home and around the world. Together, we will discuss issues and ideas with policymakers and industry influencers. And today, I'm pleased to be joined by Manon Bombardier. She serves as the Assistant Deputy Minister for the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, or PMRA. Manon oversees the entire agency's work and priorities, including regular business delivery and sustaining the progress on transformation of the agency. Before assuming this role, Manon was the ADM responsible for the agency's business transformation, which is helping achieve its objectives for strengthened protection, improved transparency to increase public trust, and making better informed decisions using sound and high-quality real-world data. Prior to that, she was the Acting Associate Assistant Deputy Minister at Health Canada in the Health Products and Food Branch, overseeing regulatory activities that contributed to the fight against the COVID pandemic. Previously, she served as the Director General of Natural and Non-Prescription Health Products Directorate. And before joining Health Canada in October 2016, Manon served in various executive leadership roles at the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission and the Environment and Climate Change Canada. Manon holds a PhD in environmental toxicology and an MBA. Manon, thank you for stopping by for a fireside chat.
Thank you very much, Erin, and thanks for having me. Very pleased to be here.
Excellent. That's quite a diverse background. If you don't mind me asking, the CRTC, what was your role there?
Well, I spent 10 years at Environment Canada, Environment Climate Change, managing their compliance and enforcement program. And I loved it. It was really very applied work. So when that function ended for me, I moved to CRTC and I took the role of launching a new compliance and enforcement legislation on the anti-spam, so the anti-spam law. So creating a new investigative team and implementing a new penalty regime. So I did that for CRTC for 3 years. And then I was called to come to Health Canada. But that was an interesting time.
I'm sure a long history of leadership positions, and we're going to get to that towards the end, but we have a lot to talk about between now and then, and I appreciate that you've been so generous with your time. I have to be honest, when we reached out to our members to invite questions for this conversation, I'm sure it will come as no surprise to you because our members are highly engaged in their ongoing conversations with you and your team. There was significant interest, so we have a lot to get through today. But first, I think in an effort to level set the discussion, in our sector, it's well understood that the responsible use of crop protection products by Canadian farmers helps us to feed our country and the world while helping to reduce the need for more land. However, not all of our listeners may be familiar with the critical role that the PMRA plays in reviewing and approving these products while ensuring that they play minimal risk to human health and the environment. So perhaps before we get into the weeds, you could give us a sense or provide an overview of the PMRA's roles and responsibilities, Manon.
Yeah, no problem, Erin. So the short of it is that PMRA, which is a branch of Health Canada, it's called an agency, but it is a branch of Health Canada, and it is the federal regulator for pest control products in Canada. So our primary mandate, as you indicated, is to prevent unacceptable risks for human health and the environment from the use of pesticides. Our work is fully governed by the Pest Control Products Act, which provides a registration regime for all of the pesticides in Canada. And this registration, which is provided by the PMRA, is done only after a very robust science-based risk assessment has been completed to ensure that the product is safe. Our scientific reviewers apply very modern and evidence-based scientific approaches to their work to determine whether the risks are acceptable and if the product has value. It includes monitoring existing products on the market. So we have a requirement in legislation to reevaluate every 15 years each of the registered products. So we do that through our post-market program. We also conduct special reviews in certain instances, again, to ensure that the products that are on the market remain safe over time. We also set maximum residue limits. So we have a very solid team of scientific experts who review requests for new maximum residue limits or increasing residue limits. So they do that again to ensure that these limits do not present any health risk. We work very closely with key partners. So the key one in Health Canada is the Regulatory Enforcement and Operations Branch, so RORB, who promote compliance with the regulations and the rules. The CFIA, the Food Inspection Agency, ensures compliance with the maximum residue limits. And at the federal House level, we work very closely with Environment Climate Change, who share a mandate on environmental protection, as well as agriculture and agri-food, given the importance of the agricultural sector in the products that we regulate. And of course, we have a lot of international activities as well, which I'm sure will come up in the context of this conversation.
Okay, thanks very much, Manon, for the introduction. Now, I want to spend a few minutes talking about a topic that is of particular interest to council members, and that is the announcement that was made in August of 2021 when the Ministers of Health, the Environment, and Agriculture shared the stage, and a commitment was made to undertake a process to ultimately transform the PMRA. And you've been involved in and leading this process now for almost 3 years. Now, first, the word transformation was clearly deliberate and suggests to some perhaps that there was something inherently wrong with the agency. And in an effort to kind of have a shared understanding of what that means, I looked up the word transform. And according to the Cambridge Dictionary, it means to completely change the appearance or character of something. And so, with that in mind, what is it about the agency or the processes that it undertakes that needed to be fundamentally changed in your view?
So you're right. The starting point for our transformation was the ministerial announcement in August 2021. And that announcement was not about, what we do is completely wrong. But we needed to make some investments in certain targeted areas to make sure that we evolve with our context. And the context is very complex. So that's why this announcement was made. There was a lot of pressure for us to be more transparent, to be more predictable, to be more efficient, to improve protection. So all of these challenges were all coming at the same time. So it is huge change. And I would say the transformation at PMRA is probably one of the most ambitious and comprehensive program of change in our history. It involves not only shifts in how we do our work, but also shifts internally, how we organize ourselves, the culture of our organization, how we align our work, how we work together. So it has significant impacts, like within the organization. It changes the way that we conduct our activities. So it affects all parts of the agency. In many ways, the challenge that gave rise to the transformation remained the same, but the context in which we operate continues to evolve. This is not particular to PMRA. Many of our international partners are facing very similar challenges, expectations from the public in general, civil societies, and key stakeholders continue to evolve. We need to adapt with that. The sheer speed and the complexity with which the science and the technology continues to evolve, the data that we use in our risk assessment continues to grow. The advances in the tools that we use, the increasingly innovative sectors that we regulate, including the agri-food sector and how it uses novel technologies, all of these changes and these evolutions require us to continue to adapt and evolve, including our workforce, to make sure we have the right skill set to address these new emerging challenges. So we must continue to do that. So when I launched the transformation in the fall of 2021, I made a commitment that PMRA would be better informed, would be more transparent, and would be more responsive as a regulator. Our transformation is actually a journey, and I knew from the start that would be difficult. Change is never easy, and success is never guaranteed. And we have a long way to go, but I would say we've made significant progress so far. And I'm very proud of the people that make PMRA and very appreciative of the helpful contributions that we've received from all of our stakeholders and partners. We would not be where we are today if we hadn't had that support and the good advice and contribution from everyone, including our staff.
We appreciate the opportunities for engagement. Sorry to cut you off, Manon.
No, it's good. That the one thing that will remain unchanged, though, because despite all of these changes, there's one thing that will remain the same, and it's our dependence on science-based risk decision making. So the science will evolve, but using the science to defend and to support our decisions will continue. Science remains the foundation of our decisions, and that will not change over time.
Important point. I'm glad you added that. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about the progress that you've made over the last 3 years. To enable this work, Health Canada received a significant amount of funding. I think it was about $42 million over a period of 3 years. You're coming to the end of that overall funding envelope, and we'll talk a bit more about what's coming in the future. But can you provide an overview of the transformation progress to date?
Absolutely. Again, I'm very, very proud as to where we are since we launched in the fall of 2021. Again, we needed to make significant changes in our overall operating model. And to do that, we've launched a number of initiatives under three major areas. First one is modernizing our business processes with the introduction of a new continuous oversight model to detect and assess and respond to emerging risk way earlier than what we currently do at the 15-year reevaluation milestone for the most part. And also elaborating what we call a proportional effort approach to allow us to be more agile, priority-driven in the use of our limited resources, because we cannot do it all. And a one-size-fits-all does not work. So proportional effort is a critical ingredient to the success of our modernization. The second objective was moving to a more transparent model as well, where we generate plain language communication products to help Canadians understand how we make decisions and what these decisions mean for their health and safety and the safety of the environment, and also providing better access to interested stakeholders to the data and information that we use in our decision making while protecting confidentiality. And that is important because I know stakeholders have raised concerns with that, but maintaining confidentiality remains critical and will be sustained over time. And the third area is better informing our decisions through scientific advice. We've launched the Science Advisory Committee and through real-world data. So we did not start from scratch in the fall of 2021. A lot of engagement had been done since 2018, and what we've heard has really shaped the agenda. The one thing that's brand new under transformation that did not start like in the 2018 is the transparency. And we've made significant progress in that area. I just want to name a few. So again, we've launched the Science Advisory Committee, which held several meetings. Everything that we provide to the committee is open to the public. We have agendas, we have material, we have observers attending. So it's very transparent, and we use that advice, and they provided us advice so far to help inform our scientific decisions. We've established a formally trained science communication team to develop and publish several plain language risk communication products, including on maximum residue limits, which, as you know, was on pause. Any increases were on pause for 2 years. It was important for us to raise the trust in the public as to how we determine those limits and what they mean in terms of the safety of Canadians. So a lot of effort went into developing these risk communication products. We're now disclosing the names of applicants, which is also something that we were criticized about, that we were not transparent about who made applications to PMRA. So we're now disclosing the name when the file goes into the review. And of course, we've invested in water monitoring. We've successfully conducted a pilot for 2 years that is now informing a national program that we're about to establish. And we're getting ready to implement our modernized business processes. So lots of progress, but it's thanks to everyone's contribution, stakeholders, partners, and ultimately our staff.
Thanks for that, Manon. I want to build on something. I want to ask you about something you've just said. Maybe we can pull this into the next question, because I want to get a sense of what your vision is for transformation moving forward, because we're coming to the end of that first 3-year term and related funding. And I guess one of the other questions would be around, how does the PMRA maintain its ability to be an efficient and science-based regulator through this transformative process? I'm going to throw a third one at you when you reflect on the vision for and the future of this process, and that is around the role specifically of the advisory committee. You spoke about the advisory committee providing valuable advice to the staff of the PMRA. What is the scope of their work, and so what role do you see them playing going into the future as well?
Okay, so hopefully I'll be able to cover all of that in a very short time. So one of the feedback that we've received since I joined PMRA in 2021 was PMRA does excellent science. So please continue to do that, and that's the plan. But PMRA needs more resources to support its core scientific work, as well as the National Water Monitoring Program. So a lot of support from all stakeholders on the National Water Monitoring Program. So so we've heard that from many of the stakeholders, and particularly from industry and growers. We got good news in the budget 2024 announcement, as you know, which commits to extending the funding that we've received for this year and the next fiscal year. So this provides us the means to continue to implement the national water monitoring, continue our efforts to improve transparency, and continue to modernize our processes. I would say it's not just about adding resources. It's also the transformation, like we're adding more resources in the system to do these things and fully support our core business. But it's also having the data, the systems, the processes, the functions, and the expertise that we need to continue to do our work in an evolving context. So I would say a lot of the work that we're doing is to do our work better, using the strong science that we have, and even improve the science with more monitoring data to deliver good services to industry and good outcomes for all of the Canadians, including on transparency and, of course, protection. When it comes to the Science Advisory Committee, so their scope of work is to provide scientific advice. So they don't provide advice on policy. They do provide advice on scientific questions. For the most part, so far, the questions have come from PMRA. So we've asked them, for instance, to look at the criteria that we are going to use to prioritize our efforts on the reviews, like the low priority versus high priority pesticides. How do we categorize those using scientific criteria that make sense, that are solid, robust, predictable? So we've asked them for feedback on that. So ultimately, it informs policy or informs regulatory decisions, but the question is scientific in nature. So we take their recommendations, we look at them, is this feasible? Is it within our scope of responsibilities? And if so, we agree with them, we implement that, or we look at implementing them. There's some that are outside of scope that may pertain to responsibilities of provinces and territories, for instance, that we would not be able to implement. But we're very clear with them, and it's through conversations that we determine what we're going to implement and versus what we're not going to proceed with. And so far, they've met 8 times. They've provided us advice on multiple questions, and it's been a great experience for us. And observers, as I said, are able to attend if they're interested, just so that they see the conversations and where the advice is going and how it's being used. So I hope I've addressed, but I would say maintaining our ability to be efficient, that's the purpose of that transformation, in doing our job in the best way possible, and being a science-based regulator. As I said, this will remain critical moving forward.
Final question on this topic, Manon. When I'm out talking, in particular, I think to our farmer members, and I think of my previous role with the Grain Growers of Canada, having these conversations because the agenda was initiated 3 years ago now. I frequently get questions around what is it that we're ultimately trying to achieve here, and how will we know when we get there? So, what does the agency look like in your view once transformation is complete? And I think this is also an important question for the balance of our members who are concerned about the ability of the PMRA to keep pace with its core work when significant resources have been dedicated or redirected to the transformation agenda. So perhaps you can speak to that as well, Manon.
Yeah, I just want to clarify, Erin, something here. We are not redirecting core resources to deliver on the transformation. The renewed funding that was announced a couple of weeks ago allows us to sustain our transformation while allowing us to maintain our core capacity to deliver on our core regulatory work. But it's clear that the cost of transforming our business model to be more transparent, to have access to the best available science, including real-world data and scientific advice coming from our Science Advisory Committee, and increasing our oversight over the whole life cycle of the product, there's a cost to that. And that's what we got the funding for. When we reach steady state in a couple of years, because many of the transformation initiatives have already been implemented, especially on transparency, we're now starting to implement on our modernized business processes. In a couple of years, when we reach steady state, on all of these fronts, we will be more focused in how we allocate our resources. So we will allocate our resources where they matter most. We will be more transparent, more predictable, and most importantly, Canadians and the environment will be better protected from our activities. All of these changes contribute to increasing public trust, which is, the whole purpose of this transformation. The big trigger was the public trust and the eroding public trust in the decisions that we make and us as a regulator. So it's important that we rebuild that public trust, and we can only do that through the efforts of our transformation. So we know that we cannot do it all at once. So we're not approaching our transformation as a big bang transformation. We take a more agile approach so that we minimize the impact on our core work. For instance, in implementing our continuous oversight model, which is going to affect like the whole life cycle of how we approach the review to pesticides. Right now, we open the books every 15 years. So we look at the pesticides that are on the market every 15 years, or of course, if something happens within that 15 years, we will look at that. But for the most part, we look at them every 15 years. What we will do with continuous oversight is open these books more often. We will scan literature on a regular basis to identify new emerging risk, and we're going to assess them and respond in a more timely manner. But it's clear that we won't be able to do it all for all of the 7,000 or 8,000 pesticides that are on the market. We need to prioritize, and that's where proportional effort comes in, is to allow us to review the way that we allocate our resources to make sure that we allocate more to those products that require more oversight. So we will be implementing these changes in a phased and iterative approach. And that's what we've said to staff. We'll start slow. We'll start with a limited number of active ingredients in terms of implementing continuous oversight. And we will assess the results of that implementation. And if we need to adjust, we will adjust before we ramp up, including in looking at the impact on our resources. If we see the impact is quite large and there's bottleneck in certain portions of the processes, we'll be able to adjust before we ramp up. So that we're going in a very agile, iterative way so that we can learn and improve and make sure that the system overall works and minimizes the impact on our core business. So that's the approach that we're planning to use.
Thanks, Manon. I want to come back in a moment to that public trust piece that I know is so critical. But before I do, let's talk a bit about some of the lenses that you might apply to your work. And so, as the PMRA is consulting on proposed changes, whether it be through transformation related initiatives or on areas like the proposal to update fees for pest control products, how does the agency consider any potential impacts on the Canadian grain sector's competitiveness or access to innovation?
So we recognize that the Canadian agricultural sector is driven by science and innovation. And to remain competitive, they need access to modern, innovative, and effective pest management tools. And as the climate continues to change, this will continue to add challenges, for growers and producers and those manufacturers of these products, and us as a regulator as well. The one program that I want to highlight in this context is the Minor Use Program, which you're probably familiar with. It's a key initiative, and that was put in place to increase the competitiveness of growers in Canada by improving their access to new innovative tools. And this program, which is administered by PMRA, we implement that with AFC, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. So that's a real program that's in place, and I have to say it's been quite successful so far. The collaboration that we do as well on the international front with our regulatory partners is critical, such as working with the OECD, the World Health Organization, so that what we do is align internationally so we don't create barriers to innovation and access. So it's critical that we continue that international engagement, that we are in these forums, that we influence the outcomes, the methodologies, the approaches, so as to continue to protect and encourage innovation in Canada, because we want these products to come to protect Canadians and to protect the food that we consume every day. So the investment internationally and domestically in various initiatives will continue. Domestically, we do a lot of work to expedite time to market, for instance, with the labeling modernization initiative. We spend a lot of time reviewing hundreds of pages of labels, and I know the registrants spend a lot of time producing that information for us. So we want to expedite, automate these functions. So we are also looking at efficiencies domestically to improve time to market. With regards to our fee proposal, so we have received a lot of feedback on the proposal that we put forward in January of 2024. We're currently looking at what we've received. So how we consider any potential impact, we seek input, and that input we're considering to adjust our approaches to make sure that what we propose achieves our objectives while minimizing the impact on not only on the growers, on the industry, and on us as the regulator at large, while making sure we maintain that we achieve what we aim to achieve.
Thank you, Manon. I want to come back in a moment to the piece that you referenced around regulatory cooperation with our international trading partners, because that's fundamental. But first, let's talk a little bit about public trust and the influence that can have. And so we recognize that there is a segment of the Canadian public that questions the value and the use of this type of technology, and like everywhere in the world, can lead to political pressure to potentially diverge from a science-based regulatory decision-making process towards regulatory approaches aimed at appeasing these segments of the public. How do we improve upon regulatory transparency, predictability, and efficiency, in your view, Manon, while ensuring that these regulatory decisions remain strictly science-based, which you've suggested is critically important to the agency?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would start by saying that first, it's a very fascinating time for me to to be in this job. As for any regulators, and PMRA is in that boat again, we work in a very complex environment that keeps changing, keeps evolving. And we talked about some of these changes before. These contribute to making our job more challenging, but at the same time, very relevant for Canadians. And these challenges, they all come at us simultaneously, like expectations increasing from all of the stakeholders on transparency, on predictability, on efficiency, climate change challenges, and just they all come at us all at once. Managing them where in the background we have multiple demands on us, including our heavy workload, especially on the reevaluation side, adds to the challenge. So figuring out what needs to come at the top of the pile, how we prioritize, and how we do all of these things in a way that is sustainable for us as an agency is also a challenge. So improving transparency, predictability, and efficiency while maintaining our very robust science-based decision-making process. For me, they're all ingredients of success and our transformation. And I believe that these elements are not contradictory. They're not incompatible. I believe they are actually supporting each other. So our robust science, I mentioned, will continue. That will not change. But if I use, for instance, proportional effort and continuous oversight, as I said, these two approaches, they go hand in hand. While we increase the level of oversight across the product life cycle and we are more predictable in what we're finding, we're more transparent about what we're finding to stakeholders, we're improving protection. Of course, that adds pressure on our very stretched capacity for reviews. So that's where proportional effort comes in. It allows us to be more efficient in how we do that. So we are increasing our oversight, but we're doing it in a more efficient way by making sure that we prioritize our level of effort and our resource allocation where we need them the most. So streamlined pathway for low priority pesticide is something that you're going to see more and more. And while we maintain a very robust, comprehensive scientific review process for those products that we need to spend more time on. And we'll be very transparent about how we do that and how we categorize the products in those two buckets. So transparency will be there, predictability will be there, strong science-based decision-making will be there, ultimately for the benefits of everyone involved. So it's possible to do it all. You just need to be very deliberate in how you spend your resources and where you spend them and why you spend them more in one area versus the other. I could give another example, but I know we're short of time, but our approach to chemistry is another example where we're going to adjust our approach to be more efficient, improving protection, while at the same time being a bit more transparent and predictable. So I think they complement each other. I don't see them as incompatible, and that's what we're trying to achieve.
For some time now, Manon, sector stakeholders have been advocating for earlier and more meaningful engagement with the PMRA, in particular during the reevaluation process. We're disappointed that this has still not been given priority. What are your thoughts on moving forward with a pilot that explores earlier and more meaningful engagement?
So we view early and meaningful engagement with stakeholders and partner as a critical element of the work that we do, especially as we improve our processes. So we've not forgotten about this. It's something that's still top of mind for us. There are opportunities for early engagement, which include, when we gather more information, we want to, if there's scientific studies that exist, we're going to scan the literature, but we're going to be open for studies from all parties, not just registrants. So, and our scientific advice. So we're going to explore additional opportunities to engage not only industry, but other interested key stakeholders to make sure we have the best available science to inform our decision. That includes our SAC, that includes our partners on water monitoring and pesticide use, for instance. So engagement for the regulatory decision making, I know that that's something that we've heard quite a lot during the consultation, to engage early, particularly growers, especially when they need to find alternatives depending on the outcome of our decision. So that's something that we're going to look at. Right now, we're focusing on the step of literature, scanning and research, and setting ourselves well to do that new function, that centralized function in PMRA. But one of the next steps will be to look at early engagement. And we already received a lot of feedback, and I know it's top of mind for the team to look at that.
Excellent. That's great. Thank you very much. As I'm preparing to head to Whitehorse next month to meet with the federal, provincial, and territorial agriculture ministers, I'm reflecting on the meeting that took place on the opposite end of the country last year, when one of the outcomes of that meeting was the formation of a working group that was dedicated to examining challenges related to pesticides. The group recently released a report with a series of recommendations. And so my question to you is, maybe you can respond to some of the recommendations that were outlined in the report, as well as talk a bit about how the PMRA plans to engage with this working group going forward.
So you're right. The report is fairly recent. It came out, I think, in early May. So we're still reviewing the findings and the recommendations, working very closely with our colleagues at Agriculture and Agri-Food. As they are developing a response and an implementation plan, we will be part of that exercise, because PMRA, as you've seen in the report, our role is captured in many aspects of that report. So we want to make sure that we're part of that response, and we've been working very collaboratively with agriculture on this. There's 5 recommendations in the report with a particular focus on enhancing consultations, which is something that we already talked about, that we want to do and we've already done on the transformation. How do we bring this into our regulatory decision making is something that we're very conscious about. There was another one on increasing the sharing of real world data and expertise, which again, we're very active in for our own mandate. Advancing research and knowledge transfer to enable access to effective and innovative pest control products. That's more an area that AAFC has a lead on. But access to effective, innovative products from a regulatory perspective is also important. How do we make sure that there's no barriers to that access? It's something that we're conscious about. And again, the international work and the work that we're doing domestically will help with that, especially biocides for growers, biopesticides, for example, for growers. I would say the record of discussions that was in that report is very consistent with what we've heard and our own consultations with provinces and territories, with grower groups, especially during the 3 years of our transformation. And many of the recommendations are consistent with what the work that's currently underway at the agency. So there's no misalignment. It's just making sure that the work that we do is framed in the context of those recommendations, and that we pursue this work. For instance, we've heard loud and clear that we need to improve engagement, engaging early. So that is an aspect of our continuous oversight model that is still in development. And I mentioned the minor use program that we'll continue to leverage. By the way, the minor use program, I was talking about the efficiency earlier, from 2019 to 2023, over 1,500 minor uses of pesticides have been registered through that program. So that is significant. So we'll continue to work in terms of next step. We'll continue to work with AAFC on the response. And I know there's future meetings coming. There's one in July, so we'll be part of that, but we're there to support AAFC in this. We're not the lead, but we'll definitely be there when they need us.
Great. I think that they are a valuable resource, and I'm pleased to hear that there is already some alignment with respect to what you've been hearing through your consultations and what has come through in this report. My final question to you before we get to a closing question is around what you've already talked about, and that is the importance of regulatory cooperation, in particular with our trading partners. CUSMA, the free trade agreement between Canada, the US, and Mexico, has been incredibly beneficial to the grain sector and in ensuring and the continued availability and affordability of food across the continental trade bloc. Regulatory harmonization across our three jurisdictions is ultimately what enables trade, innovation, and profitability. So, Canada, the US, and Mexico, all three countries are undertaking modernization efforts to their respective regulatory agencies on pesticides. And so, can you tell us a bit about what is being done to ensure regulatory harmonization in this space?
So personally, I'm not involved in this work. It's more Frédéric Bissonnette, who you probably know. But I know from, and Fred updates me on all of these activities, that the trilateral technical working group on pesticides under this agreement continues to work towards these priorities. The working group, I'm told, has reconfirmed their terms of reference very recently in 2023. And one of the highlights of these updates is to serve as a focal point to address pesticide issues that arise under the trade agreement. The primary responsibility of the working group is to promote cost-effective pesticide regulation and facilitate trade between, of course, between the three countries through harmonization, work sharing, and science-based decision making. There's a high degree of collaboration, and they meet annually to discuss that continued collaboration under the technical working group and to provide that forum for harmonization and exchange of ideas. And there's also open communication between the partners. We have regular calls with the USCPA, for instance, on many files and many policy issues that come up on either side of the border to help each other to make sure that we're aligned, again, to reduce the barriers to trade as much as possible. And the working group is currently drafting their strategic work plan as we speak, and these considerations have been raised by industry and grower representatives. So again, what Fred assures me is that technical working group continues to work towards those priorities. But that is an area that is top of mind for us, and we'll continue to monitor and be involved and engaged very actively moving forward.
Excellent. Good. We'll continue to seek some feedback from Fred on that as the conversations progress. So we're going to switch gears here for a moment, Manon, before I let you go. You've been very generous with your time, but I have a personal interest in leadership, having studied the topic as part of my graduate degree. And I think that increasingly the unprecedented challenges that we're facing require unprecedented leadership. And so I want to close all of my conversations by asking my guests to weigh in on the topic. And my question for you, Manon, is this. For the last 3 years, you have led the PMRA's transformation agenda, leading a sizable team through a process which promised change, but as most of these processes do, offered little insight into specifically what those changes would be. Those are challenging circumstances for any leader to find themselves in. Change can be disruptive and it can feel overwhelming for staff. So, how did you, as a leader, bring agency staff along with you on what you referred to as this journey? Can you offer other leaders in our sector whose organizations are undergoing change or maybe facing uncertain circumstances some advice with respect to what your experience has been on this journey thus far?
Well, this is an excellent question, Erin, and I love it because I am also very passionate about change management in an organization and the leadership aspects to it. So I'll touch on a few key lessons learned, and there's a lot, but I'll just touch on a few and be happy to pursue that conversation offline at one point if you're interested. The first one that is critical is early engagement at all levels. So the tendency might be to go to your executive and just have the conversation, the top-down approach. That does not work. You need to speak to everyone. You need to engage all levels. All levels of the organization need to feel that they're included in the conversation and have something to say about the approach and the expected outcomes. And so they can start thinking about how this transformation, what does that mean for them? You know, get them to start thinking about this early, not only at the end when you're thinking about implementation. You need to get their heads, their mindset going right from the start. So that's the first one. And we've done a lot of engagement. There was a lot of engagement done before I arrived with the program renewal. I know you're probably aware of that initiative that was launched in 2018. A lot of staff engagement, a lot of great ideas were generated. And these ideas fed into shaping the agenda. So people saw right from the start some of their input reflected in the plan. And it helped us document the challenges that staff were facing as they were conducting their day-to-day work and find ways to make some improvements in those areas. The second one is, I would say, is organizational alignment and very strong change leadership. Change is required at all the levels, but it really starts with the top. The top executive team needs to be fully engaged, fully bought into the plan. If you have resistance at that level, you'll never succeed. You need strong leadership from the top to influence behaviors, to influence thinking, reassure staff, why we're doing this, answer their questions. If it's only the person who's in charge of the transformation who speaks up, which was me, coming new to the organization, I had no credibility in the organization. So I needed to have strong spokesperson in the organization to deliver that message because they had the credibility, they had the loyalty. Loyalty is extremely strong in PMRA, and I needed to use that or to leverage that to help us achieve, our goal. So that was essential. And it's also making sure that we optimize our communication and collaboration mechanisms. As any organizations, there are silos. How do we make sure that there's collaboration? To change a business model that affects everyone, you need people to collaborate. You cannot make a change here and the other groups are not aware. So everyone needs to work together, understand where they fit in the process and where they can contribute. It was also important to have strong leadership at the top to make sure that we focus our efforts, our energies, our resources where they matter most. So we had tough conversations about the prioritization. How do we maintain, how we minimize the impact on core work while transforming, and how do we allocate our resources to those areas? Third, change is never easy. And as you know, transformation is a continuum. So we made it very clear from the start that the full implementation and the results would take years to achieve. Like, we wanted to make sure that we're seen as realistic. Otherwise, we get a lot of skepticism. So it was clear from the start that we would not do a big bang approach. As I said, we would not get there in a year, that it would take us several years because staff were highly concerned, and they're still concerned about heavy workload and competing priorities. So setting realistic timelines based on the true capacity of the organization was important. Because if you set timelines that do not match the capacity of your organization, you're not going to succeed. So you can create a real sense of urgency for change, which is something that we often hear, create that sense of urgency. But it doesn't mean that you have to expedite all the timelines beyond what is humanly or even possible for the organization. Because that could have damaging impacts and ultimately fail. And as a leader, you lose credibility in the face of everyone. So you cannot go there. So we need to look at the complexity of the changes. We need to look at the readiness of the organization to change, the resources that are available and where the demands are, and the current workload, which is extremely high. So we took all of these into consideration, and we developed an implementation approach that, as I mentioned, we call agile and progressive. So we start small, we experiment, which means, scientists are very used to experimentation, but the fear of failure is there as well. But you got to build that sense of comfort with sometimes, you won't get it right the first time, but that's okay, because there's a lot of uncertainties about the change, but that's why you want to start small. We want to predict or whether it works. We want to look at the resource implications. We want to show small successes along the way, adjust as we need to before we ramp up. So that's the approach that we communicate to staff, and I think it reassured and reduced that anxiety that was about the change and uncertainties. And finally, the last one is you need to know what makes people tick, what ignites them, what passions them, where they're very committed, and where there's causes for them to resist. Because these dynamics need to be considered in how you're going to manage change. So that you want the staff to participate in a positive way to achieve the level of buy-in, the minimal level of buy-in, that you need to be able to succeed in the long run. So again, I could go on, but I would say these are probably the critical factors that I've seen in PMRA that where we had to make some adjustment along the way. But I think we're in a good spot. There's, the morale is improving, and yeah, I see a lot of positive down the road from this transformation for all of us, not just the PMRA, but obviously for our Canadians, the public, and of course industry and the growers and our interested stakeholders in civil societies and in academics as well.
I envision one day maybe an opportunity for a 1-hour panel discussion with a handful of our sector leaders to explore some of these topics in greater detail, because so much of what you've just shared with me, Manon, I think I'm taking copious notes because it applies to this transformation that you're undergoing. But I think it also applies to smaller decisions that are taken by organizations to ensure buy-in. And in particular, if you're new to an organization, to ensure that you have allies and that buy-in is coming from a trusted source as you work to establish trust of your own with your staff. So appreciate your insights there. Tremendously valuable. Thank you for your time today, Manon, and your perspective both on the topic of leadership and all of the various initiatives that are happening under your leadership with the PMRA.
Thank you, Erin. Pleasure to be here, and all the best.
I hope you found this episode as thought-provoking and inspiring as I did. Remember, these Fireside Chats with Erin are monthly, so mark your calendars. We'll be back in July with another great conversation. Stay connected with us for more engaging conversations that delve into the heart of the grain industry. You can catch us on your favorite podcast platforms, including Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube. Just search for Fireside Chats with Erin and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Until next time.